Hi, most of you guys know who we are, but for those that don't, I'm Cindy Jones,
I'm Rocky Jones.
and we have three kids, Caleb, Seth, and Lauren, and Caleb is our oldest. On October 9th this last year, we were blessed with the news that we were going to be first time grandparents. Caleb and Rachel came to our house and they gave us each a Yeti mug mine said grandma and his said grandpa, and we were just thrilled to death. Um,
At that time, we started thinking about Bible verses such as what we find in Jeremiah. It says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." And we knew God that was going to be part of Mason's life, and we just didn't know to what extent until some things happened that gave us a different perspective of how God can work in your life.
Sometime after Thanksgiving, before Christmas, Rachel started having some issues with her blood pressure. She started swelling in her legs pretty severely. And after Christmas, then the doctor put her on bed rest. And that was pretty intermittent. She could stay for a couple of days and then her blood pressure would get a little better. But then it just continued to get worse. The doctor tried blood pressure medications, full-time bed rest, all kinds of things. And by the end of February, she was just deteriorating to the extent that he told her on, I believe it was March the 1st, that he thought she really needed to go down to UAMS, to their high-risk pregnancy center, because he felt like she had preeclampsia.
This occurred on Thursday, oddly enough, right before the Christ Teens was starting here at Westside. Caleb called me at work and told me that Rachel was going to be taken by ambulance to Little Rock, so I left work and got with Caleb, and we followed Rachel to Little Rock in the ambulance. We had 30 kids actually coming to our house with 5 adults that weekend. We were struggling on knowing what to do. We went to the hospital that Thursday evening and stayed, and then came home on Friday, I think, and started preparing for our kids to come to our house. We felt that Rachel would be okay until Christ Teens hopefully finished, and we had committed to that.
Luckily, we were right, and everything stayed good until Sunday. She was on bed rest, and they were giving her medications, and everything was moving along okay. It wasn't great, but it was manageable, and we were able to keep the kids. And then after everyone left our house that Sunday, we went on back down to Little Rock.
One of the unique things about that weekend was that the group from Springdale that we keep, Brent Roach, is one of the adult sponsors, and they continually prayed with us that weekend. All weekend, after the things going on at Christ Teens, they would come home back to our house, and we'd have a prayer for Mason and for Rachel and for Caleb, and then they left Sunday. And as fate would have it, that's where Grayson is now. Grayson Taylor is now the youth minister at that church. So we've grown very close to that group.
As that Sunday progressed, Rachel's health deteriorated very quickly, and she developed what's called HELLP syndrome, and that's basically a really severe form of preeclampsia where her internal organs started shutting down. After her liver enzymes tripled within an hour, they determined that it was time to go ahead and take Mason by C-section, because if they didn't, it could have killed both of them. And a little after 6 that night, then our Mason Dean was born, and everything looked great. Rachel was still in bad condition. She was still on several medications, but Mason was extremely healthy. His birth scores, they're called APGAR scores, were up around 7 and 8, and 10 is normal for a full-term healthy baby. So he was doing great. The nurses even told Rocky, what did she say?
She said, "You don't have to worry about Mason. He's fine. He doesn't need any oxygen. Mason will be okay." All the time watching Caleb, he was so worried about Mason and about Rachel and for Rachel's health. But I started to see a growth in Caleb that made the dad very proud.
He was a champion for both of them. He would stay in Rachel's room, and then he'd run down 2 flights of stairs to go see Mason for a while, and then he would come back, and very little sleep for a week for him. Very, very worried about both of them. Luckily, Rachel's mom was also able to stay and take care of Rachel when he couldn't be in the room with her. But we did see a huge growth in our son that we still talk about all the time.
When Mason was a week old, we went to Little Rock and took Rachel and Caleb out to eat. We got a call immediately from the hospital. Said to get back to the hospital immediately, that Mason was very, very sick, and they had to take actions. And that's when we returned to the hospital.
His heart had stopped beating, and he'd stopped breathing, and they'd had to resuscitate him, and they were asking permission to intubate him or put a tube in his lungs so that they could put him on a ventilator, because he wasn't able to breathe on his own right then. When we got there, it was a really scary time, because the last time we had seen him was a couple of days before, and everything looked good, and he was growing. He was on room oxygen. He wasn't even on any oxygen in his incubator at all. And now to see him, they'd started IVs and put this tube in his nose and throat, and you could tell he was very, very sick. They determined that he had developed MRSA staph, a very serious staph infection, along with something called ORSA staph, and they didn't give us a whole lot of hope. It was very, very, very serious infection.
Yeah, they told us typically MRSA staph is most of the time a death sentence for a preemie baby. What I did is I immediately called Mike Cooper, one of our elders, and he and Daryl Harrison came to the hospital that night, and we started praying for Mason. The next day, it was either the Monday or Tuesday.
It was Monday. We stayed at his bedside, and
then the doctors had a meeting with us, with the entire family, on Tuesday. And Rachel's parents were there, we were there, Caleb and Seth and Abby were there, and Nick and Lauren were all there. The doctor and a nurse practitioner met with us and basically told us all the things that were wrong with Mason. It's a meeting that you really don't want to have.
they gave us every reason that he wasn't going to make it, and if on the off chance that he did, everything that would be wrong with him as he grew up.
I remember the statement that Caleb made, "We're not giving up on Mason." And immediately Rachel's dad, Gary, started talking to me about bringing elders together, and he pulled a verse from James chapter 5, I believe it is, that says, "Is any among you suffering? Let him pray. Is any cheerful? Let him praise. Let him sing praise. Is any among you sick? Let him call the elders of the church, and let them pray over him and anoint him with oil in the name of the Lord." So that's what we did. Gary called a large group from New Life, and they came down. All of our elders from Westside, I believe, came down that night. It was a little bit of a blur to me, but we spent much of that night praying over Mason. Of course, we couldn't anoint him with oil because he was in an incubator, and we all laid our hands on the incubator that evening and prayed. Ladies came from New Life, and we really appreciated everyone coming down.
It was a really, really tough time because, you know, you hear of miracles all the time and you want to believe in them, but until you've actually seen them in your life, it's hard to say, yes, they're really, really out there. And for me personally, my faith, I've always felt was strong, but I didn't know that I truly believed in miracles from heaven, honestly. And
the nurses and the doctors at UAMS were constantly praying with Caleb and Rachel. We were very impressed with them. My faith, likewise. I remember texting my mom and Tammy and Tom and Calvin and Amy and telling them how sick Mason was and that it did not look good at all. And then the next day, I texted them back and asked for forgiveness for my faith being so weak.
because the next day, as Caleb prayed over Mason again in his incubator, the doctors had said if he doesn't pee by the end of today, we're going to have to put him in comfort care because there's nothing else we can do. We've done everything. We don't know of anything else. We've called in all the extra doctors, all of the expertise, everything that we've got available to us, and we have nothing left. So it's going to take a miracle. And Caleb kept praying over him, and Rachel kept praying over him. But as Caleb stood there, then Mason started peeing. And I remember on the Facebook pages how amazing that was to see the response from people basically all over the United States and some foreign countries responding on Facebook and rejoicing and praising God with us because we saw that miracle happen in those few minutes and those few little ounces or cc's even of pee that came along in that tube out of his bladder.
And the next challenge that Mason had was his stomach, his gut, I guess is basically the doctors were calling it, that his gut had died. And that was a big challenge for Mason and for the doctors to try to figure out how to get Mason's gut working again.
And during this time, he had little hurdles that he had to overcome, and they were feeding him full of fluids. And he went from a 2-pound, 13-ounce baby to over 8 pounds full of fluids. And his skin dried out, and his skin turned dark, and his belly grew big, and he just looked so sad. And it was almost like, okay, God, he peed, but we need more than that. We need a healing. We need a full healing, because it just hurt so much to see him laying there looking so sick.
We were asking so many things from God. It was amazing to see to us the number of people that were communicating with Caleb. I have to give a lot of credit to Caleb and Rachel for keeping so many people up to speed about what was going on with Mason and what specific prayer requests were needed. So many of you here at Westside, our elders, folks at New Life, churches all over Russellville were praying for Mason every day. We received texts and videos of kids in their Bible classes praying for Mason. The next challenge, I guess, that Mason had, even after he peed, His stomach was still not exactly correct, but he had a blood clot that was right next to his heart. And they told us that there was nothing they could do about the blood clot, that if it broke loose, that Mason would die immediately.
And it wasn't a small clot, it reached all the way to his liver, so it was several inches as well. And then, according to the doctors, it just sort of spontaneously started healing itself. It just started disappearing. But we knew during that time that it was the specific prayers for the blood clots, and that's why they were going away, because God was working a miracle in our grandson.
Yeah, the doctors had no explanation for this one. There were most of the doctors and nurses there were praying with them, but there was a doctor or two that just actually didn't know what to say about the blood clot, about why it disappeared.
They were really non-believers, according to what Caleb and Rachel told me, that up until this, I guess basically they were atheists. They didn't believe in God at all. They were scientists. And they had tried everything that science had to offer. And so when that didn't work, and they saw God working instead, it changed them. The next hurdle was still his gut. His bowel system was still just not working. They felt like it was completely dead, and they really needed him to poop. And that was an exciting day. I still remember when Caleb called and told me that we have poop. And I was at home, and I just laid on the floor and started crying because I was so happy.
Funny thing to be happy over, huh? Gives you a new perspective of changing diapers. On day, I guess to jump to the conclusion of this story, on day 101, Mason was released from UAMS. We have to give a lot of credit to the doctors and nurses and all the medical staff at UAMS, but we all know that God was the ultimate healer in Mason's life.
I think he used the staff's hands, but it was him working through them. I truly believe that.
Now Mason is becoming a young man, a little baby boy that's beginning to interact with people, and staying at our house, staying at another grandparent's house some, and Caleb and Rachel are beginning to let him go more and more places.
I have a verse, though, that I found through all of this, and it's always been there because the Bible has always been there, but it's from Psalms, and it says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name." And that just kind of sums it up, that Mason wouldn't be here today if we didn't have God in our lives, and if we didn't believe in the power of prayer, he wouldn't be here with us today.